And once we have our login and logout functionality in place, now let's start restricting the access to a dashboard to the people who haven't logged in. So if we take a look at our complete application, once I log out, I'm being kicked back to a login page. And even though that I know that my dashboard is essentially my homepage, so just my domain, if I'm trying to get there, since I haven't logged in, I'm being kicked back to a login one. So I only can access the dashboard if I log in. So if I haven't logged in, then of course this is not going to work. Now in this case, of course, I removed my coding addict, I think. So let me just log in with the Google. And then once I do, of course, I can see my dashboard. Now, how do we do that in our application? Well, first, we would need to set up a private route. So how does that look like? Well, if we take a look at the app.js, we have one route for the dashboard, we have one for the login, and then, of course, we have also one for the error. However, you'll notice here that we have a component in the pages that has the name of private route. So this is where we'll set this up. Where essentially the way it's going to work is we're going to have a private route and we will wrap our route, the one that we would want to protect. In this case, of course, that is going to be our dashboard one. We'll wrap this one into a private route. And then in that private route, we will check, hey, what's happening? Are we returning something? Are we logged in and all that? So let's try to do that. So in the private route, first, what I would want you to understand that route is still going to be passed in. And by the way, this is annoying. I don't know why it's not opening a new one here. So let me close these ones. I'm going to close the dashboards for now. And then we'll only have two of them. We don't need context, readme, or index. And what you need to understand that still the private route will wrap the dashboard. So that will still happen. That's why we'll right away say that I would want to access two things. I would want to access children because, again, the dashboard will be a child of private route, and I definitely want to render it. However, what we're doing here is we're collecting the values, and then we can just give it some kind of name, which in my case is going to be REST. So what am I doing over here? Well, still the private route is going to have the path as well as exact and all that. So that's not going to change. So first, I would want to grab my children. So that was a special prop. And then I would want to collect rest of the props that are going to be on my component, whatever they are. And once we have this particular setup, then for the time being, we're just going to come up with a local variable. And I'm going to say is authenticated or something like that, or is user. Let's use the same one. And for the time being, we'll say, yeah, the user is true. But of course, eventually we'll use our use auth and all that. Now, once we have this particular setup, now I would want to decide what am I doing. So in here, I'll say that I'm returning a route. So that is still coming from React Router DOM. So notice in the app, we imported a route. So we're doing the same thing over here. I'm still importing the route. So in the private route, I will return a route. I will grab all the props that I'll set up on the private route. That's why I'll do, grab me rest or whatever name you give over here to the rest of the props. So notice how we're now spreading out. So here we were collecting them, collecting rest of the props that were on the private route. And now I'm just spreading them out. Now I'm placing on that route that I'm returning. And then for the route, we would have a render prop. So we're going to go with a render. And then in that render prop, we need to pass in the function. Now from that function, whatever we're going to return, well, that is what we're going to render. So in here, what I could say is a return, and then I'm just going to check my user. So if the user is true, then I'm just going to pass in children. If it's not, then we have another component. Then we have redirect. So in this case, I'm going to say if the user is false, then go to redirect and then kick it back to a login one or wherever you would want. So in this case, I know that I have an option of logging in the login page. So that's why I'm kicking the user back to a login page. So we're going to do that. And then, of course, I'll close out my component. So that should be our setup. And now, of course, we don't need this private route anymore. So now we'll save it. Hopefully everything is clear what's happening, at least up till this point, because we're just using a local variable. And don't worry, we'll fix that in a second. But now in the app.js, I'm also importing the private route. So of course, now what I would want to do is to change this around, correct? Because now instead of the normal route, since I set up the private route, well, now I'm going to say private route, like so. So now once we save it, everything should be displayed, correct? Because in the private route, this is still true. So we're still rendering dashboard just because our user is true. Or notice what happens here. If I go back to false, now I'm being kicked back to a login. Why? Well, because this value is false. So now in my render prop, what am I doing here? I'm checking if the user then only display the children. What are the children? That's a dashboard. However, if it's not, then please use the redirect component and kick the user or visitor back to a login page. So now I can click all day long and I'm not going to get there. All day long, I can just keep on typing and all that, and nothing is going to happen. And what is our next step? Well, now, of course, I would want to hook it up to the use auth, correct? I would want to check whether the user has logged in. And if that is the case, then I'm only going to display the dashboard. So instead of just displaying this as a local variable, now I would want to access my use auth just like we were doing in an app bar. So that doesn't change. I'm just going to go with const and then is authenticated, and then user. And I'll set this equal to a use auth, remember? And then I'll invoke it. So now the same how in a nav bar, I'm just going to say is authenticated. By the way, I messed it up. Authenticated and user. So if that is the case, beautiful. Then is user is going to be true. And then, of course, we'll render. But I can tell you right away that there's a gotcha. And that gotcha has to do with the fact that we don't have the wrapper yet. That's why I previously mentioned that it's so important for us to have the wrapper. Because you will see, even though technically on the surface, our functionality makes sense, it's not going to work. I just showed you that, yes, if you just hard code it, you're not going to be able back to a dashboard. But I can tell you right away, even with a login functionality, we're not going to get there. Okay, that's why we'll need our wrapper. So I'll save it. This is going to kick me back to a login. We already know that. So now, of course, let's bravely navigate to our login page. And the only thing we need to do is essentially use the use auth and then set up a login functionality. Now, you know what? While we're at it in the login, I might as well also log in, maybe sign up, because maybe some people are confused. So sign up like so. Let's try it out. How does that look? I think it looks good enough. And in here, what are we looking for? Well, we will need to import, of course, our use auth, which of course we already are doing. And then we would want to get our login with redirect. Because even though we were using this in navbar, correct? Again, technically at the end, we're not going to use that in navbar anyway. Because once we log in, we'll display the dashboard and that login link won't show up. Now, I'm not going to delete that because I would want you to have it for a reference, but I'm just telling you why we won't use that login with redirect in the navbar. Now, I will head back to a login page. Then we will get that from use auth. So const and then login with redirect. So login with redirect here. And that is going to be equal to a use auth. We will invoke it. And now, of course, for my button, what do I need to do? Well, I just need to set this up. I need to say on click is equal and then login with redirect. Let's save it. Just to make it interesting, I'm going to navigate to a bigger screen. We have our starter, beautiful. I can refresh, of course. I haven't logged in and all that, so that's why I don't see the dashboard. But since it is loading, I can tell you right away that even when we log in, this is not going to work. So let me try it. Now, Remember my email that I changed? Let me try with this one, John, and log in. And yep, I technically logged in. Everything's fine, but notice I'm being kicked back all the time. And this is exactly what we'll fix in the next video.